Hello, everyone. Welcome to Quantum Catechesis. I'm Father Joe Krupp, and you are not in today. Today is Wednesday at some point in 2022. Is this September? September of 2022. And we are going to continue our series through the heroes of the faith. We started with Abraham, then we went to Isaac, and now we're going to finish up, maybe, Jacob, and then after that we'll cover John Wayne. No?
I love that.
Jacob is a wily man, and we're going to get into him in just a bit. But I want to remind you that tomorrow, our guest is none other than Bishop Earl Boyer, superstar action figure, miters sold separately, some assembly required. He'll be on live. Are we noon?
We are.
And are we live? I can't remember.
We are live at noon, and we are from
his office.
Yes.
Yes, so it will be, I think, a joy. I love Uncle Earl. I'll tell you this, he's one of the best teachers I ever had. And I had a lot of great teachers. And beyond that, he's a successor to the apostles. And I thought maybe not. I was going to do a whole thing on bishops. Let's do this. Can you remind me that on Friday, I want to talk about what is a bishop? Because I'm realizing more and more we really don't have a sense of that. And the role of a bishop is a mystical role for us, not just a practical one. And I'd love for us to take a look at that.
So it'll be our first question.
A fist. No, we have one. I forgot. I'm also supposed to tell you, someone asked one on my Facebook page.
I think I caught it.
Did you? Oh, great. So I wanted to,
I think.
Was it about my dad's bad attitude?
Yes. Never.
That'll take hours.
Never.
So, as you may remember, we started on Jacob, and what we found is a few things, right? That, of course, Jacob and Isaac are running concurrent to some extent, but what we may remember is that Jacob was a wily guy who got tricked by his future father-in-law Laban into marrying the woman he didn't want to marry, and then kind of getting conned into that so that he could then marry the woman he did want to marry. And it was all a wreck. And we may remember that the Lord appeared to Jacob, and Jacob kind of did I don't know. If you do these things, then you can be my God. Jacob is a little arrogant, as young men are wont to be. But as his life unfolded, what you see is a guy who's just kind of out there. And like his dad, has all sorts of trouble with his wife and having children, but it's the exact opposite trouble his grandfather Abraham had. Namely, he's just cranking out kids constantly, but not with his wife. And we know his wife, not that he was cheating on her, they married multiple women at this time, but his wife was really cruel to the wives that could have kids. And the Bible tells us that God's generosity to those other two wives is because life was hard for them, because Rachel was so cruel to them. But eventually Rachel cries out to the Lord and she gets some kids. So what does it look like? Let's run through it, okay? Jacob, first he was in love with Rachel, but he got tricked into marrying her, frankly, not so attractive sister Leah. Rachel treated Leah like crap. Jacob treated her like crap. She called out to the Lord, and God gave her 4 boys. Reuben, whose name means God saw my distress. Simeon, whose name means God has heard. Levi, which means he will cling. And remember, that was the one that kind of breaks your heart, because that was Leah hoping, maybe if I give Jacob another son, he'll love me. And he didn't. He loved Rachel. But then she got another boy, Judah, which means I will praise. So Rachel gets ticked at Jacob for having kids with, I don't know, his wife. So she tells him he has to fix this. And what she does is gives Jacob her maid, Bilhah. Jacob and Bela produce Dan. Daniel means God is my judge. Naphtali, which means my struggle. Leah sees this going on and says, no, you're going to sleep with my slave. He sleeps, poor Jacob. Sleeps with her slave, Zilpah, who gives birth to Gad, which means good luck, and Asher, my happiness. And it's just wild, right? Leah wants Jacob to love her and gives him 1 billion kids. Leah does. Rachel is loved by Jacob and can't have kids. It's really, and Jacob's just like, all right, I'll sleep with her, and good Lord, poor Jacob. But God keeps reminding Jacob, I promised you're going to have a lot of descendants, and did you see that?
Nope.
Okay, sorry. The whole screen just disappeared. Okay, there. Just a second, folks. My spot dissipated. The womb war continued. That's what I call this, the womb war. So far, Leah has Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah. Through her slave girl, Rachel has Dan and Naphtali. Through Leah's slave girl, she has Gad and Asher. So then you may remember Rachel. They go through this whole thing. Do you remember this with mandrakes, where Reuben goes to his mom Leah and gives her mandrakes, right? He feels bad for her because Jacob doesn't love her. So her oldest son brings her mandrakes, which were considered aphrodisiacs and would enhance women's fertility. So Rachel wants them, but Leah refuses. Right? Rachel sees, well, Leah got those from Reuben. I want those too. Rachel trades her one night with Jacob. She says, well, I'm supposed to sleep with Jacob tonight. I'll let you sleep with him for some of the mandrakes. And isn't this crazy?
Yes.
In the end, Leah gives birth to another child, Issachar, meaning reward, or treasure given as a reward, and then Zebulun. And again, you can see her desperation in the names. What does Zebulun mean? He will finally honor me. And then she gives birth to Dinah, a girl. What? Yes. And Dinah is a Hebrew word for vindicated. Rachel, in the meantime, now has her mandrakes, and she begs God, and it said, quote, God remembered Rachel. And she gave birth to a son, her only son, Joseph. And his name means God has added. So, holy cow. Right now, we're done with the womb wars. Okay, a whole ton of boys, 12 boys, a girl, all born with 4 different women, which again, wasn't uncommon back then. What was uncommon was the wife he loved was the one who couldn't have kids. But she finally had one, Joseph. And we're going to see that the rest of his life, Jacob loves Joseph, right? Why? Well, it's the wife he loves, that's her son. Okay? You see how the family bitterness this is all going to blow up. You can't have favorites, right? You just can't. Dad had a favorite, and it was me, but that was just so much common sense. Do you have that in your family? Like, everyone's like, they think you were the favorite or another person was, and you're like, no, you were clearly the favorite. Do you have, no?
Yeah, a little bit.
So now let's get back to Jacob and Laban. Because you think all his wife drama is enough? No. You may remember Jacob's father-in-law, Laban, and they don't say father-in-law, they just say father, right? They don't have a word for cousins, they don't have a word for father-in-law. But we say father-in-law just to keep it straight. So Jacob decides he's going to return home to Laban. And Laban, you may remember, Jacob decided he was going to return home to his parents, but his father-in-law, Laban, didn't want him to leave. Why? Because remember where it said, as long as Jacob was there, Laban prospered. So what was Laban going to do? Well, what he always did to Jacob, he's going to trick him. Okay, but what we're going to find is this time Jacob out Laban's Laban. Okay, well, we get into this thing. Let me read it to you real quick. Are people okay?
Yes.
All right. So in the end, Jacob and Laban are talking, and Laban doesn't want him to leave. Okay. So what does he do? Make a deal. Sorry, guys. I thought I had the page set. There we are. After Rachel gave birth to Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, I'm going to go home. Give me my wives and my children for whom I served you and let me go. Because remember the whole deal? You marry, Jacob says, I want to marry Rachel. And Laban says, great, you got to work for me 7 years to get her. So it said Jacob worked for 7 years, but for him it felt like a day. He was so in love with Rachel. So then what did Laban do? On the wedding night, he got Jacob drunk and put Leah in the tent instead. And when the next morning Jacob woke up, was like, what the hey? Laban said, what? Well, work for me 7 more years and you can marry Rachel. So this is, remember, Laban was a wily old dude. But anyway, Jacob's point is simple. I want my wives, I want my kids, I want my stuff, and I want to go. Laban said, look, I prayed, basically he says, I prayed and God said, the reason I'm doing well is because of you. I don't want you to go. Jacob says, then tell me what I owe you and I'll pay them. Jacob said, you know what work I did for you and how well your livestock fared under my care. The little you had before I came has grown into an abundance since the Lord blessed me. Now, when can I do something for my own house as well? Laban answered, what should I give you? Jacob answered, you do not have to give me anything. If you do this thing for me, I will again pasture and tend your sheep. Let me go through your whole flock today and remove from it every dark animal among the lambs and every spotted or speckled one among the goats. That will be my wages. You with me? So that's the payment. Listen, I'll just walk through. I'll take all the sheep that are dark and all the spotted or speckled goats. Okay? Those will be my wages. In the future, whenever you check on my wages, my honesty will testify for me. Any animal that is not spotted or speckled, you get. Okay? So Jacob's trying to set up a system where they can tell whose stuff is which. Right? Which sheep are mine? Well, the speckled ones. Which goats are mine? The spotted ones. So what happened? Laban said, great deal. Let's do it. And then he took all the speckled and spotted and dark lambs and goats out of the flock. And then he traveled 3 days away from Jacob. So Jacob, however, did this thing, and I won't bore you with all the details, okay? But basically it's this. Ancient herdsmen believed that visual stimuli could affect the offspring of breeding animals. So Jacob acted on this. He has the goats look at streaked rods while mating, and the sheep look at stare at the dark-colored goats while mating. Okay, what the hey, right? He basically performed breeding experiments over the years, and it made his flock more abundant than Laban's. He became very rich. Now, Laban's sons over time noticed this. So Laban tried to trick Jacob, and Jacob was like, fine, I'll just make my own flocks, in a sense, and he did, and he was so good at it that Laban started to get jealous. Do you see how this keeps happening over and over in the life of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? The three of them will do what people ask of them, and then they get jealous of them for doing it so well. This is a constant theme, isn't it? So what happens? Laban and his sons start getting ticked at Jacob. The way the Bible says it is, quote, Laban's friendly attitude began to change. Okay? He tried to trick Jacob. It didn't work. And in the end, Jacob had more sheep, more goats, more healthy, more gooder. That's Hebrew. And they get really angry about it. We want the good stuff. So what is Jacob going to do? Jacob's going to get out of there. That's the smart money. God told Jacob in a dream, get out of here. Get your wife, get your kids, get your sheep and your goats, and get away from Laban as quick as you can, and do it without telling Laban. Jacob listened to the angel, convinced his family, look, we're going to sneak out in the dead of the night. Now, while they're leaving, without Jacob's knowledge, Rachel goes into Laban's tent, her dad's tent, and steals his teraphim. These are little figurines of gods. Remember, Laban's not a Jew. He's got his little idols. So she took them with her. Now, let's look at verse 22. On the third day, word came to Laban that Jacob had fled. Right? So Jacob's been gone 3 days with all his herds and all his flocks. Taking his kinsman with him, he pursued him for 7 days until he finally caught up with him in the hill country of Gilead. But that night, God appeared to Laban in a dream and told him, do not molest Jacob. Right? Do not bother him. So finally, they catch up. When the two meet, Laban plays the part of the injured father-in-law, and he wants his teraphim back. Jacob points out, bro, you tricked me numerous times to get me to stay. And then I did everything you asked. You prospered because of me, and then you still were trying to force me to stay. Now, at this point, Jacob doesn't know that Rachel stole her father's idols. And Laban basically is like, you stole my idols, and I want them back. Jacob's like, I didn't steal your stuff. Yes, you did. No, I didn't. Yes, you did. That's how it went. So finally, Jacob, what's his butt? Laban says, well, let me inspect your tent. Now, that might not sound like a big deal, but that's a big deal. And Jacob agrees. He's like, I didn't steal anything. Yeah, go through my stuff. And the Bible tells us, he gets in there, Rachel's in there. And when she saw what was going on, she sat on the idols. Okay, so she's covering them, in a sense, with her booty. And in the meantime, Laban and his sons tear up the tent, looking all over. His idols are in here somewhere. When they get to Rachel, and pardon me for this, Rachel tells them, I can't stand up, I'm menstruating. Okay, both cultures, right? The Jewish culture and the Canaanite one would have said, leave her alone, right? Her blood is sacred, you just leave her alone. So they did. So they don't realize what's going on. When Laban comes out and hasn't found the idols, Jacob tears him to pieces, right? I can't believe what a jerk you are to me. I am so good to you. I've done everything you've asked. I've made everything go well for you. I've gone above and beyond the call of duty, and you do that. You do this to me. At one point he makes a reference, I thought you might find this interesting. I've never brought you a sheep torn apart by beasts. What did he mean by that? Well, if you look at Exodus 22:12, the law they had went like this, that if a sheep was lost or stolen, the shepherd had to pay back the owner, right? So if I'm caring for Carrie's sheep and Dad steals one of them, I have to pay Carrie for that stolen sheep, yeah? But if I present that sheep to Carrie and prove to her, look, it was mauled, then there's no punishment. And not only that, the remains would then belong to me, right? Like it's a meat. Jacob was showing him, look, I never brought you one. I took the hit when animals tore your sheep apart. I took the hit. He's saying he went above and beyond. They then make a pact, okay? That there will be peace between us. And Laban goes his way, and Jacob, and they build this big mound of stones as a testament. This is our pact. okay? We're now at peace. Let's just chill out, and we're going to stay away from each other for a little while. And that's exactly what they do. What's interesting is when Laban makes his vows, he vows in the name of his gods, right? So he's got some gods. Jacob swears in the name of, quote, and this blows me away, the fear of Isaac. That's the name he calls God. At this point, you got to remember, Jacob hasn't called God anything. All he said to God is, yeah, if you can do that stuff, I'll let you be my God. And now we might have an insight as to why the only name he knows for God is the God my dad is terrified of. Right? The fear of Isaac. Isn't that something? So you may remember I started talking about this last week, and I wrote my thoughts down, and I want to share them with you, and I want to be so clear. This is me speculating. This isn't doctrine or dogma or any of this. This is something I've thought a lot about. It's the only time God has called that the fear of Isaac. Remember, Isaac is Jacob's dad. If we said it in English, it would be the God my dad is afraid of. Isn't that something? You can see maybe now a little bit more why Jacob was like, yeah, we'll see. You do your stuff. And if you do that, I'm in. Which again, arrogant as all get out. Classic Jacob. So I wrote, this makes me wonder about Isaac's relationship to God. Abraham was a friend of God. The Bible makes that clear. They talked, they negotiated, and Isaac was the result of God's promise to Abraham. But you gotta wonder how being strapped down with your dad over you with about to sacrifice you to a God, you gotta wonder how that's gonna affect a boy growing up. His relationship with his dad and his relationship with his God. Jacob's oath might have given us a bit of a hint. Isaac saw his dad respond in obedience to God to the point of willingness to kill his own son. Isaac also saw God provide the ram as a sacrifice that freed him from being the sacrifice. And then I imagine the terror of this boy. I imagine him trying to, get out of the ropes that his dad bound him to. And if you go back and read again, you can see a few things about Isaac. He was the first child that we know of ever circumcised as an infant, nearly sacrificed when he was young. We know when his mom died, he mourned and was lost. We know that he married Rebekah. We know he had Jacob and Essau. We know he blessed Jacob and that he died. Isaac was in the field meditating, it says, walking and thinking when he first met his wife. The Lord did appear to Isaac on several occasions, and like his dad, Isaac immediately obeyed whatever the Lord spoke to him. But unlike his dad, he never spoke to God, not even to say yes. He just did it. And like his father, Isaac was also deceitful whenever he was scared. Remember, he said his wife Rebekah was his sister when he suspected that a powerful man wanted to sleep with her. We know that God protected her and him and then gently restored Rebekah to him. The Lord spoke to Isaac. Isaac immediately obeyed, but the Bible never calls Isaac a friend of God like it does Abraham. But the Lord made the same covenant with Isaac that he did with Abraham. Quote, I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and will give them all the lands, and through your offspring, all the nations on earth will be blessed. God also told him at one point, I am the God of your father Abraham. Do not be afraid, I'm with you. I will bless you and increase the number of your descendants for the sake of my friend Abraham. Isaac worshiped the Lord. But he also acted like his dad, right? Like again with saying his wife was his sister. We know that when he was in a conflict with Abimelech, he walked away from a fight, just like his dad would have done. We know that when Jacob calls his God, quote, the fear of Isaac, you can't help but wonder what his dad had told him about this God, right? All Jacob seems to be clear on his dad was terrified of this God. Isaac understood the power and supremacy of God in a way nobody had experienced yet. And he had put a new meaning into the phrase sacrificial living. He understood that his very life came from God and was given back to him by God. And it's really powerful to think of that the defining trait for Isaac was the fear of God. And I know fear of God might not be something we're comfortable talking about. We like the love, the blessings, and the provisions of our God, but we've struggled to remember we only exist because of him. We have breath because of him. We are alive because God chooses to let it be so, not because we deserve it or are somehow in control of things. Whether or not we fear God is at the root of almost all of our questions of why. It all seems to boil down, I think, to a trust factor. Have I learned to let go of trying to control my life and destiny? And have I realized what Isaac realized? I'm terrified of him, but he always takes care of me. There is a peace and relief in our life when we get there, right? Trusting the fear of Isaac. I had just told someone a few weeks ago when they were like, it's hard for me to believe in God when bad things happen to good people. And I'm like, I don't know how that's connected to believing in God. I can understand how it's connecting to liking God or understanding God, but what does that have to do with whether God exists, right? But I hope you didn't mind me going through all that kind of reflection, because to me that's intense. And something that really helped me was an article I read called Wandering Through the Word about that whole thing of what a crazy experience of God Isaac had. What a profoundly terrifying and comforting experience of God. Wow. Okay. So, whoops. Sorry. There we are. I'm almost done. There. Okay. So anyway, that's a sidestep. Where are we in the story now? So Jacob is still working his way back to Canaan. Laban is far behind him. And he feels relatively safe now about Laban because he made an oath in the name of the fear of Isaac, or the terror of Isaac. Laban made an oath in the name of all his gods, and now they're moving on. Now, do you remember why he'd be afraid to go back to Canaan? Do you remember this? His brother.
Yes.
Right? Don't forget, he screwed his brother over big time. He tricked his father into giving him the blessing that was supposed to go to the oldest. And his brother Esau was furious, right? How did Jacob end all the way out there with Laban? He was running from Esau. Now he's running from Laban, and he's going to bump into Esau, who last he saw him was going to kill him. And frankly, rightly so. Jacob did a dirty, dirty thing. So what did he do? He sent messengers ahead to find out, where is Esau? Okay, they came back and they're like, okay, good news, we found him. Bad news, he's on his way and he's got 400 armed men. Jacob doesn't have 400 people at this point. Esau's doing so well, he has 400 guards. So what does Jacob do? Praise to God. Remember, you promised, huh? You promised, and I said you could be my God if you do these things, right? He pours it out. And he sent a whole crap load of gifts ahead of him to Esau, right? He's like, hey, coming to see you, big brother, love you a lot. Here's some cash, a lot of it. Sends his best sheep, his best goats, send him some slaves, the whole banana. So that night, Jacob is alone, okay? His family's all asleep, and he's sitting by a river, and he is alone, quote, in communion with God, which is a great way of saying, help, okay? There, a mysterious being appears to him. They're described as a man. This person is in Genesis 32, 24 and 28, as God in Genesis 32, 28 and 30. I mean, you could just go on. And again, this all goes back to that thing I told you. They weren't clear. Was this a human? Was this God himself? Was this an angel? They don't know. Okay. But in the end, the two of them mix it up. Okay. They start fighting. They start scrapping and wrestling. And they wrestled until daybreak. Now, you remember we told you how strong physically Jacob was. Remember that? He picked up that well cap that it took 6 men to pick up. Well, this being could not seem to overpower Jacob. And Jacob couldn't seem to overpower him. They were fighting to a draw. So what happened? The being cheap shot at him, okay? Punched him in the hip and this, quote, sinew of his thigh. And as a result of this, by the way, Jacob limped, it says, for the rest of his life. He took a good, hard, cheap shot, okay? And it threw his hip out of socket. So what then? Well, Jacob, being Jacob, and what does Jacob mean? The grabber, the clinger, locks on this guy's ankle like a pit bull on a tire and won't let go. And the being is like, dude, you lost, let me go. He's like, not till you bless me, which was a good way of conceding the fight back then, okay? You defeated me, I want your blessing. Okay? So then the beings gave him a blessing and said, from now on, your name is Israel, which means fights with God, because you have wrestled with God. Okay? Jacob asked the being's name. I'm not telling you, right? Why? Because when you gain the spiritual being's name, you gain power over them. Okay? And this guy's like, no, I'm not stupid, right? We're going to change your name, but I want you to know you wrestled with God and you lived. And that's why the nation is called Israel, because Jacob is the father. Those 12 boys he has become the 12 tribes of Israel. Okay, and Israel is Jacob's new name. Although everyone still calls him Jacob, his name is Israel. Wrestles with God, contends with God, fights with God, whatever way you want to translate it. Jacob named the place Penuel, meaning I have seen God face to face and lived. Right? When it was done, he was like, oh my Lord, literally, I saw God face to face and lived. Okay? So was it an angel? Was it God? Was it a person? Sure. Who knows? Whoever it was, God caused it. God intended it. And it went just like God wanted. Okay, and remember, Jacob limped the rest of his life. Okay, now, in the morning, Jacob assembles his 4 wives and his 11 sons. Benjamin wasn't born yet. And then he put, things were different, okay? He put his maidservants and children in front. Yeah. He put Leah and her kids next. He does not like Leah, right? And then Rachel and Joseph in the rear. Now, what is this? It's really Jacob just, that's who he wants safe, Leah and Joseph. Jacob himself goes up in front. Jacob and Esau meet, and it's beautiful. Esau loves his little brother. And it's the same thing that happened before their big fight. Esau loves him. He knows his brother's a knucklehead. He knows he's a trickster. But he loves his little brother. And it's pretty clear Esau can't believe Jacob thought he would hurt him or his family. He tries to give Jacob back the gifts. I don't need your gifts. I'm doing better than you. Right? You keep your stuff. And Jacob just begs him, no, I owe you. Right? I owe you. They then celebrate together and agree, well, let's move on together. Let's get back together. Let's get the band back together. Esau says, well, I'm going to give you, first Jacob tells him, we can't really walk together. All my people are young and they're women. You've got dudes. We'll slow you down. Let's just agree to meet each other at a location up there. So fine, they do that. But what's really cool is Esau says, I'm going to leave a lot of guys to accompany you. I want you safe. I want my little brother safe. It's very sweet. Jacob tries to say no, you don't have to do that. Yeah, I do. So it's just this big-hearted Esau who Jacob made a fool of, who Jacob stole the only thing he had, right, his birthright. It's just sweet as pie. It's his little brother. He can't help it. Now, this is the point that I talked about earlier, where they do get back together, Isaac and Esau, and they bury, Jacob and Esau, and they bury their dad together. And that's a big deal, the two of them together. How are we? Okay, now the next topic is tough. So I don't know how else to say that. Okay, but they settle in Shechem, Jacob does, and he bought a chunk of land. But while they were there, Jacob's daughter Dinah was kidnapped and raped by the king of that area's son, who was just taken with her. Right, so the king of that area had a son who saw Dinah and was overcome with lust, kidnapped her and raped her. Now, a lot happens, but the shortest possible version of events is Jacob immediately is like, let's not tell the boys what happened. Yeah, let's make a plan and we'll deal with it. But two of the boys, Simeon and Levi, overhear what's going on and made a little bit of a plan. Okay, so all the other brothers kind of were in on this, and what they did was went in and their dad Jacob said, okay, the prince is saying he wants to marry Dinah. He's in love with her. As it turns out, it's not just lust. He's in love with her, and he promises to become a Jew if we let them marry. Now, Jacob's sure the boys are going to say no, but they're all like, yeah, let's do it. So all the men of Shechem, though, they should get circumcised first. All right? So the king has all the men of Shechem circumcised so that his son can marry Dinah. Okay? Now, the Bible tells us, quote, on the third day after the circumcisions, when all the men were still in great pain, Simeon and Levi charged in and killed them all. Right? They killed all the men. They grabbed their sister, grabbed all the plunder they could, and got the heck out of there. Right? Holy cow. Right? They got that thing from their dad of, I'll just outthink you. So, holy cow. And I'm sorry, I know that story was tough. You can't ignore it, because this is how people thought back then, right? And I do like the whole, while they're still sore. Yeah, gents, 3 days after you're circumcised, you're in no position to defend yourself. Jacob found out and said, quote, to his sons, he condemned them. Quote, you have brought trouble on me. You have made me a stench to the Canaanites and the Perizzites, to the people living in the land. And years later, when Jacob's dying, he's still ticked at them. He still brings it up. So Simeon, Levi, and Dinah are the children of Leah. Right? This is their, we would say, blood sister. Again, they did not make that distinction, but these are Leah's kids. So now we're back full circle with Jacob. We're back at the place where he first met God. Remember, at Bethel, he's back there. And when he met God, he was poor, he was alone, and he was arrogant. Yeah. Remember this? I can't get over that. The part where God's like, oh my gosh, I loved your dad. I loved your dad's dad. I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to be your God. Yeah, let's see. Let's see how you do, God. I'm taking applications for God. But when he got there again, this time he's not poor. He's crazy wealthy. He's not alone. He's surrounded by women who love him, by kids who adore him, and he's a lot humbler. Isn't that cool? Everything about him changed. He has made a complete circle on the map, geographic circle, as well as an emotional, spiritual circle. He's reconciled with his brother. It's just cool stuff. If you look at verse of chapter 35, if you look at verse 1 through 4, Jacob accepts the deal, right? That God offered years ago. Okay, I'm in. He not only obeys God, but he then goes through the area and purges it of any false gods. Quote, God returned the favor by putting all the nations in the area in dread of him. And you got to imagine that the whole Levi-Simeon thing, really, word got out. Don't mess with those cats. Yeah. Jacob names the place El Beth El, meaning the God of Bethel, right? The place where God offered his deal to him years before. Jacob returns to Bethel, where he had another vision of blessing. Now, although the death of Rebekah, Jacob's mom, is not explicitly mentioned in the Bible, Deborah, her nurse, died, and Jacob buried her at a place he named under an oak tree, and he named it the Oak of Weepings. So it seems that's probably where he buried his mom too. Okay. Jacob then made a further move while Rachel was pregnant. So this is Rachel giving birth to. So near Bethlehem, Rachel went into labor and she died as she gave birth to Benjamin. This is Jacob's 12th son. Jacob buried her and built a huge monument over her grave. You can go see it. It's Rachel's tomb. It's just outside of Bethlehem, and you can go there. It's a legit historical site. Jacob then settled into Adar, where his firstborn Reuben, and I'm so sorry about this, but slept with Rachel's servant Bilhah, who Jacob had slept with. Jacob doesn't say anything until he's dying, and then he curses Reuben for it. So what's interesting is that this is how the Bible writes Jacob's death. This just so touches my heart because they don't say this that I can find anywhere else about anyone. Jacob was finally reunited with his father Isaac in Mamre. Okay, so that is Jacob. Yeah. Now you know that's not the end of the story, right? But I just wanted to get you because you know the big story. I think we went through it, didn't we, in an earlier show? Jacob's boys then hate Joseph precisely because he's the only one whose mom is the woman Jacob loved, Rachel, right? Their moms, Jacob's didn't like very much. He loved Rachel, and he had one kid, right? And that's the one they hated. So what did they do? They convinced Jacob, your son is dead. They threw him in a well. Remember this? And then Joseph is sold to some slave traders, Ishmaelites, who then trade him to Egypt. Joseph rises up through the food chain in Egypt, and by power of his dreams, just like the Joseph we know from the New Testament, God speaks through dreams, and saves Egypt. And then those other brothers hear that Egypt's doing well during this terrible famine. While they're all dying, they go down, you know this story, right? They go down to Egypt to get food. Joseph sees them. They don't recognize him. 20, 30 years have passed, and he probably looked like an Egyptian to them. And Joseph screws with their heads a little. You remember this? And then when he saw how horrible they felt, like they didn't know he spoke Hebrew. So they're talking to each other and saying, this horrible stuff is happening to us because of what we did to our innocent brother. And that's where Joseph's like, oh man, come on. All right, I'm your brother, Joseph. What you meant for evil, God meant for good. I had to be here so that I could save Dad's family. So then all the Jews moved to Egypt. right? And they lived there in peace and prosperity until there comes into the land a Pharaoh who knows not Joseph. And that's where we get to Moses, who we're going to cover. No, we did Moses. Well, no, we did Moses. So that is Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And hopefully you notice, like to me, this is what always stands out. These guys could be pretty slippery. They could be cowardly. They could be dirty. I mean, fighting dirty. They got angry. They got jealous. They got happy. They loved our Lord and obeyed him and screwed up a lot of other things. And, you know, and this is something I see all the time and I can never quite wrap my head around. But that's what people who love God are. We're like everyone else, but we love God. We make mistakes. We sin. I do crack up, you know, like when you see, oh, this Christian fell, and it's just proof of how messed up Christianity is. No, it's proof that it works. Just what the gospel said today. What did Jesus say? I didn't come to call the righteous. I came to call sinners. And you might think, well, we're all sinners. But not everyone seems to get that. Yeah? Those of us who get that we are broken run to the doctor. So never be surprised that we're broken. Please. That's crazy. Yeah? So just like our apostles, these guys were a wreck, but they did their best. And what defines Abraham above all other humans, not named Jesus and Mary, he obeyed God. No matter the price, no matter the lack of information, right? Remember that? When it started out, God said, go that way to a place I'm going to show you. Okay, he goes. I would have asked for some direct, where? Where am I going? How am I going to know when I'm there? Yeah, just giddy up. Well, no, he didn't ask those things. He probably had his walker, you know. That's what makes these men great. Not their perfect morals, not their great theology. They just obeyed God. And that obedience is a stark contrast to the disobedience of Adam and Eve. Right? People, why did Jesus have to die? It might be the wrong question, but one thing you want to look at is Jesus was obedient to the point of death. Yeah? Adam was a temporal being who lost eternity by trying to become an eternal being. Jesus, an eternal being who died out of obedience. Right? And there's a million of these contrasts that we're supposed to draw. The primary, defining characteristic of a God lover, we obey God. Okay? So that's what Abraham and Isaac teach us. I just think that's really cool. Yeah. Do we have any Abraham, Isaac, or Jacob questions? Because I'm actually done with my material, but I see we still have a few minutes. I didn't mean to go so fast. Did I talk fast today?
Nope, you're good.
Huh? I thought this would take a lot longer. Okay, it doesn't look like it.
So when did they stop marrying multiple people?
By the time you get to Christianity, it had clearly become, once you move away from tribal culture, I know when we bump into the Greeks, which was about 300 years before Jesus, they were still doing multiple marriages. But again, you got to remember, it's not marriage like we understand marriage. For them, marriage had nothing to do with love. Again, think of how this is. The Bible has to tell us that Rachel loved, Jacob loved Rachel. You might think, well, that's his wife. Of course he did. No, not at all. That was just luck. And not even considered that important. Your job in getting married was to marry someone who would increase a mutual beneficial relationship. It was a business agreement more than it was anything else. It literally was well, your family has a ton of salt mines. I got a ton of sheep. Why don't we get together and we'll make a powerful union? Okay, well, how are we going to get together? Well, your kid's going to marry mine. Great, done. That's what it was about. And that in that process, you produce children. Why do you produce children? Well, to continue the name, but not the name like we do, Krupp or Pilarski, none of that. But to continue the name in this sense, my blood's in that body. And this idea, my kids now know, well, that's my grandpa and that's my grandpa. So what will I always do? Act in the best interest of both. It unites families. This is why you get so often, frankly, this idea of kill everyone, right? Like, what's his name? Levi and Simeon. Why did they kill all the men and take the women and children? Because any man who lived was going to remember this. And whatever marriage they enter into, part of the promise would be, you're going to take vengeance for us. And if it took 10 generations to do it, they would take 10 generations. War was total because of how society worked. Marriage and war were just two realities for dealing with problems. You can't kill some of your enemy. You have to kill them all the men. Because if not, somebody's going to remember. And it might take 100 years. And guys, they waited that long. They waited longer than that. It's just a different world than we live in. But once marriage started moving from sometime between the Greeks and the birth of Jesus, you just see less and less Jews marrying more than one person at a time. They definitely married a lot of different people, but that's because everybody died. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. I should find out when they stopped the practice officially, but I know when the Jews bumped into the Greeks, it wasn't common that a man had more than one wife, but it wasn't shocking. There was also a practice that the rich had called concubines. Okay, kings had these, very rich people had them. You have your wife, but you also have what we would probably call a harem, a group of women whose job was to sleep with you whenever you wanted. And were children born of those unions? Well, sure. And were they considered children of the king? Absolutely. They were considered no different than the children of the wife. But that wasn't marriage. Isn't that weird?
So did the 10 Commandments have an effect on it?
Oh yeah, like what made the Jews remarkable was adultery was considered. You got to remember, Judaism was the first, and until Christianity, the only religion in the world, in the whole world that we know of, that equated religiosity with morality, right? All the others, it was just, well, worship the gods, right? Offer them sacrifices. This God says, obey me, do what I say, and your conduct means something. So you look at Pompey Magnus, Roman, who was a polytheist, was considered a deeply religious man. He did awful things morally. Julius Caesar was considered a religious man. He did awful things morally. They didn't see any kind of contrast there. The Romans called it pietà, duty, right? You do your duty. What's your duty? Sacrifice to that God. Why? Well, they're bigger than you. Right? Well, what does that God want you to do? Sacrifice to him. Right? Well, does he care about your marriage? No. Does he care about adultery? Not even a little. Does he care about lying? Nope. Just give him sacrifices. Yeah? Does that help?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I told you this, and if so, let me know. To give you a sense of non-Jewish religiosity, okay? The Romans had a god Mars, okay, the god of war. That's who Marius is named for, yeah? And from that, we get all kinds of words. Because Mars was the god of war, you have words like martial law, the law of Mars. It's when the military's in charge. You have martial arts, war arts. That's what this all refers to, yeah? And who was this Mars? Well, what the Romans noticed early on, people fought, and you're going to laugh, but kind of on a schedule. So if Ed's tribe and my tribe, we know we're building up to a war, well, we don't just go to war. You got to fight between planting and harvesting, right? Why? Because nobody's going to screw with planting. We'll all die of hunger. And no one's going to screw with harvesting. We're all going to die of hunger. So what do? You finish the planting season, then you go kill all your enemies, and then when you come back, you harvest. It was called the war season, right? Did you know this?
No.
Oh, so what did the Romans notice? Well, every year, right around planting, this red dot appeared in the sky. And they went, oh, that's Mars. That's the blood of all the people who are going to be killed in war, or who were killed in war last year. So what would they do? They would gather at, if you've been to Rome, you know what I'm talking about, the field of Mars. Yeah, because it wasn't, at first, they didn't have an army. You had farmers who came to fight after they planted. So where do you gather? Well, the field of Mars. And you get together there, and when there's enough dudes there, you all literally scream, Mars, Mars! You're trying to get his attention. We're about to send you a crap load of blood, right? That was religious. That's what was called religious, right? They found an inscription that some Roman had, carved onto pottery, and it was Mars, Mars, the blood I pour out this day I give to you. That was religion, right? Not don't commit adultery, don't steal. That was Jewish, and that was weird to most people. Yeah, it's just a brain change. We just got to change our brains a little bit to try to see the world from their perspectives. But it's just funny to think of what was religious. Nothing to do with morality. Morality was considered a bunch of rules people came up with so we didn't all kill each other. Right? Who was it? Caesar Augustus tried to make adultery a crime, which the Romans thought was hysterical because he, of course, slept with a lot of women he wasn't married to. But again, his goals weren't religious. His goals were, we can't have these blood feuds tearing us apart. And how does a blood feud start? You slept with my wife. I have to kill you. And then that guy's kid goes, you killed my dad. I have to kill you. And then that guy's son goes, you killed my, oh my gosh. Right? Who was it? I think it was Marius, the Roman general who kind of tried to crash the democracy. He killed 2 whole families because he couldn't get them to stop fighting. So he just gathered them all together. And in fact, how's this? Marius led a major revolt. He tried to take control of Rome, and a guy named Sulla defeated him in battle. And then there was what they call the Sullan Purges. Sullan, not sullen like, oh, let's purge. But what did he do? Killed every single human related to Marius in the city of Rome. Took them weeks. They killed everyone who had any kind of blood relation to Marius. They killed everyone who voted for him or advocated for him, and then killed all of their family. Right? Now, you want to hear who one person survived from Marius's family? Do you know this? This is crazy. There was this young dude, and he was brought before Sulla, and they were like, we shouldn't kill him. He's crazy smart. He's going to be brilliant. And he really didn't help Marius. He's too young. He's 16. Can't you spare him? And Sulla was like, heck no. And so many people came forward and like, you don't get how cool this cat is. So this is true. Sulla looked at the kid and said, okay, it's your wife that is a daughter of Marius, so divorce her and I'll let you live. Kid says, no, I'm not divorcing her. I love her. I made a promise. So Sulla's like, fine, we'll execute you. And a whole ton of people spoke on this kid's behalf. Okay? So Sulla didn't kill him. Do you know his name? Julius Caesar. The guy who crashed the Republic. Isn't that crazy? And it said that Sulla said when Julius Caesar was spared, I see many a Marius in that boy. And he was right. Yeah. Sorry, that was so useless and unconnected to this whole thing. I'm sorry. I'm just filled with useless information. What did John say? John said something hilarious. UBIs.
Unimportant bits of information.
All right. So I think I'll wrap us up. Thank you guys for tuning in. I'm very excited for you to get to, if you haven't met Bishop Earl, I'm very excited for you to do so. If you've met him, I'm excited for you to hear from him. I guess that's how it goes.
Yes.
So thank you for tuning in. I will see you beautiful people tomorrow. Salad, pray. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Jesus, thank you. Thank you for the very human people who have loved you throughout the ages. Of course, we thank you for our Blessed Mother who was perfect. We are so grateful. But we really thank you today for our imperfect, knuckle-headed spiritual grandparents and great-grandparents times 20. Those who show us that we are called to obey you and to strive every day to love you a little more than we did yesterday. Thank you for Abraham. Thank you for Isaac. Thank you for Jacob. Father, we ask that you teach us mercy, that you teach us forgiveness. And Lord, you know that there's people we love very much and we worry about them all the time. And you know that there's all kinds of circumstances in our lives that we fret about. Well, we give all of them to you, Lord, because we love you and we trust you. And may Almighty God bless you all, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. My Kung Fu is strong. I'll see you tomorrow. Is it over?
No, it's never over.